A mist lay over the lake. It crept low, a spectral shroud clinging to the water's surface as if trying to conceal something that was never meant to be seen. The morning was unnervingly still, the silence so profound it felt like a physical pressure against the eardrums. It was a vacuum waiting to be filled. And then the water churned. Directly in the center of the lake, far from any shore, the placid gray skin of the water broke. It didn't ripple, it boiled, heaving upwards as though something immense and invisible was ascending from the abyssal depths. The people on the shore, locals mostly, who had long ago learned the wisdom of not asking too many questions about the lake, froze in place. Their morning walks, their quiet moments of reflection, were shattered. A little girl, no older than 10, with eyes wide with a knowledge she couldn't possibly possess, whispered a single chilling word. The bell tower. And for a fleeting, impossible moment, she was right. Through the thinnest part of the fog, a black silhouette pierced the sky, the sharp gothic spire of an old church, glistening with black water. It hung there for a heartbeat, a splinter of a forgotten world, before it slid back beneath the surface, without a sound, consumed once more by the depths. The water grew still, the mist thickened, and the moment was gone, but the image was seared into the minds of those who saw it. Imagine a village, a place that once pulsed with the quiet rhythm of ordinary life, with its loves and its labors, its births and its burials. Now, imagine that village swallowed whole by the depths. But what if the waters that entombed it did not destroy it? What if, in their cold, silent embrace, they preserved it? What if the village is still alive, in a way? Not in the land of the living, but in the echoes, in the oppressive silence, and in the whispers that rise from beneath the surface. Her name was Mara. She had come to this place by chance, a tourist seeking a quiet corner of Europe to escape the ceaseless hum of the city. For her, silence was no longer an absence of noise, but a presence she craved, a commodity more precious than gold. The hotel on the hill was simple, a rustic chalet with creaking floorboards and the scent of pine baked into its wooden bones, but it was cozy. From the window of her room, she had a perfect panoramic view of Lake W. Aldenstein, a modest body of water ringed by a dense, dark forest of pines, its surface a sheet of dull gray, like a mirror that had forgotten how to shine. "Did you know there's a village down there, under the water?" the old hotelier asked. He was a man whose wrinkles seemed to hold stories of their own, his eyes a pale, watery blue that mirrored the lake itself. He gestured with a gnarled finger towards the view, as Mara studied a local map over her breakfast of black bread and cheese. Mara looked up, a polite smile gracing her lips. "Really? Flooded for a dam, I suppose?" It was the usual story for such phantom places. The old man shook his head slowly, his gaze distant. "No, nothing like that. This was before the war. Long before. The stories say it vanished in a single night." Mara's smile became one of gentle disbelief. A local legend, a ghost story to spook the tourists. She filed it away as a charming piece of local color. But that evening, as the same spectral mist she had seen that morning began to pool over the lake once more, she felt an inexplicable pull to walk down to the shore. The air was cold, damp, and carried the smell of wet earth and decay, and it was then that she heard it. A bell. It was faint, so faint she thought it might be the wind or a trick of her own mind. But there was no wind. The sound was old, MUF fled, a deep, resonant clang that seemed to come from another time, another world. It was a lonely, mournful sound that carried a palpable sense of warning. It rang 3 times, then fell silent, leaving a void deeper than the one before it. Mara stood frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs. That was no legend. The historian in her, the part she was trying to escape, awoke with a ravenous hunger. Archival mentions of the village of W. Aldenstein were frustratingly scarce, almost as if it had been deliberately scrubbed from the record. But Mara was a professional. She knew how to follow the faintest of trails, how to read the silence between the lines of official documents. It wasn't the existence of the submerged village that captivated her, but the stark, chilling discrepancies in its history. Official provincial records from the 1920s listed W. Aldenstein as evacuated and decommissioned due to progressive soil liquefaction and encroaching marshland. It was a neat, clinical explanation. But a box of forgotten letters in a dusty church basement in the next town over told a different story. Penned by former residents and their relatives, they spoke not of a planned evacuation, but of a sudden vanishing, of a night of unnatural fog after which nothing remained, of waters that did not fall from the sky but rose from the earth. Her solitary quest soon became a shared one. She met two others at the same small hotel, drawn to the lake by their own professional curiosities. There was Franz, a stoic, pragmatic speleologist from Austria, who had spent his life mapping the dark, silent world beneath the Alps. He was here, investigating local rumors of a vast, uncharted cave system that he believed fed the lake from below. And there was Anna, a young, intense folklorist from Romania, her mind a repository of ancient tales and superstitions. She was tracing the origins of a recurring myth in the region, a story of a silent community that trades its voice for immortality beneath the water. They met, as strangers do in such isolated places, over shared dinners in the hotel's nearly empty dining room. A common thread quickly emerged, an unspoken feeling that Lake W. Aldenstein was more than just water and rock. It was a place that held something living, something sentient, and that something did not want to be found. "You really think this is anything more than local superstition, a ghost story?" Anna asked one afternoon. She clutched a thermos of hot tea, her knuckles white, as she stared out at the unnervingly placid water. Her academic interest was visibly warring with a more primal fear. "I think superstition is just a word we use for a pattern we haven't yet understood," Mara replied, her own gaze fixed on the center of the lake. "History is full of events that were once considered magic, until science found a name for it. On their 5th day, they found a boat. It was an old wooden skiff F, half-rotted and forgotten in a cove, overgrown with reeds. With some EF fort, Franz deemed it seaworthy, or at least seaworthy enough. They pushed it into the water at dawn, while the mist was still thick and the world was painted in shades of gray. The moment the boat left the shore, the world changed. Their GPS flickered and died. The compass, a reliable old military-grade instrument of Franz's, began to spin erratically, its needle dancing as if possessed. The air grew heavy, the pressure changing perceptibly, making their ears pop. Yet something was guiding them, an invisible current pulling them towards the lake's exact center. It was there, where the silence was deeper and more absolute than any of them had ever experienced, that Franz, the man of science and logic, finally broke it. "There's something down there," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Can you feel it? The pressure." Anna murmured, wrapping her arms around herself as if to ward off a physical chill. "It feels like we're trespassing, like we shouldn't be here." Their journey into the unknown was just beginning, a descent into a story that refused to stay buried. We are a new channel, and we pour our hearts into creating atmospheric, compelling stories just like this one. If you're fascinated by exploring the unknown and hearing the voices of the past, please subscribe. WE have new stories for you every day. After that day on the water, the dreams began. They were not ordinary dreams. They were vivid, intrusive, and shared. Mara saw a woman, her face pale and serene, dressed in a simple white frock. She stood at the threshold of an old stone church, its heavy oak doors wide open. W8 flowed out. From the church, a silent, steady river, yet the woman was not submerged. She did not drown. She simply stood there, her eyes looking directly into Mara's, and her lips formed words that carried no sound. Yet Mara heard them in her mind. "You do not remember. But you were here. You are one of us." Franz dreamt of stone, of being in a narrow, constricting passage deep within the earth, the weight of the lake pressing down on him. He could hear a rhythmic, tectonic grinding, the sound of the world reconfiguring itself. Anna dreamt of voices, hundreds of them whispering in unison in a language she almost understood. It was a litany, a chant, a promise being eternally renewed in the crushing dark. The amateur investigation had reached its limit. The experience on the lake had moved beyond strange feelings and local legends into something tangible and threatening. Mara, using her academic credentials, reached out to Professor Lenzer, a renowned maritime archaeologist from Munich famed for his work on submerged Bronze Age settlements. Intrigued by her frantic but detailed email, he agreed to come, bringing with him a team and a state-of-the-art remotely operated underwater vehicle. A drone. If a village truly is down there, and it was submerged quickly in cold, anoxic water, Lenzer explained. As they set up on the shore, his tone one of professional excitement. It could be perfectly preserved. A time capsule, it's the ideal environment. And what if, Mara started, then hesitated, feeling the absurdity of her own question. What if it's not just preserved? What if it's still alive? Professor Lenzer gave her a patronizing smile, the kind reserved for over-imaginative students. But as the first images from the drone's high-definition camera fed to the monitor on the shore, his smile vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed expression of utter disbelief. At a depth of 30 meters, there it was. Not rubble, not ruins, but buildings. Intact. A cobblestone town square. A well with a stone canopy. Houses with dark, empty windows that looked like eye sockets. And there, exactly where the little girl had pointed, was the church, its black spire aiming accusingly at the surface. The clarity was impossible. It was a photograph from another century. Then, something moved. It flashed through the corner of the frame, a blur of motion in the desolate, still townscape. It looked like a child darting from behind the well and disappearing into the black maw of an alleyway. But its movement was wrong. It was too fast, too fluid, a seamless glide that defied the water's resistance. It was utterly, terrifyingly unnatural. That's not possible, Lenzer stammered, rewinding the footage. They watched it again. And again. The blur was there, a fleeting ghost in the machine. It couldn't have been, Anna whispered, her face as pale as the woman in Mara's dream. That night, none of them slept. They didn't need to confer, they all heard it. The bell, it was louder. Now clearer. It tolled with a strange, precise rhythm, a single, resonant clang repeating every 47 seconds. It was a countdown. A metronome for something only the lake understood. When a sleepless, terrified dawn finally broke, they returned to the shore, the drone team relaunching the ROV with a grim sense of purpose. They had to see it again, they had to prove they weren't mad. But the village was gone. The sonar showed nothing but a gentle, sloping bed of silt. The camera, lowered back to the same coordinates, showed only murky water and a featureless, muddy bottom. There was no church, no well. No cobblestone square. It was as if it had never been. Impossible, Professor Lenzer kept repeating, clutching his head. We all saw it. The footage. This isn't a technical glitch. WE recorded it. WE have the data. Franz, who had been silent throughout the entire ordeal, his face a mask of grim concentration, reached into his pocket. He wordlessly held out his hand. Ying on his palm was a small, flat fragment of slate tile, dark and slick with water. An intricate, spiral pattern was carved into its surface. It was freezing cold to the touch. I retrieved it with the drone's manipulator arm yesterday, he said, his voice flat. Before it disappeared. The days that followed were steeped in a creeping, paranoid dread. Professor Lenzer and his team, unable to reconcile the hard data on their drives with the empty abyss in the lake, packed up their equipment and left, muttering about mass hysteria and anomalous sensor readings. They wanted no part of it. But Mara, Franz, and Anna couldn't leave. They were caught in the lake's gravity. The phenomenon began to bleed out from the water and into their lives. The walls of Mara's hotel room became slick with a cold, persistent condensation even on warm days. Words, traced by an invisible finger, appeared in the fog on her bathroom mirror. You came back. There were no signs of a break-in. The window was latched from the inside, and as sanity began to fray, she would slip into fugue states, murmuring for hours in what she later identified as a long-extinct regional dialect of Old High German, a language she had never studied. The words she spoke were fragments of prayers, pleas for protection against the hunger of the soil and, quote, the memory of the water. Franz grew obsessive, retreating into his scientific shell. He took the skiff out at all hours, armed with an array of geological sensors, convinced there had to be a rational explanation, a methane gas eruption, a localized magnetic anomaly, a geological feature that created some kind of complex optical illusion. Then, one evening he went out and did not return. They found his boat the next morning, adrift in the center of the lake. His equipment was neatly stowed. A single muddy footprint was on the floor of the boat. But Franz was gone. "We have to go, now," Anna said, her body racked with tremors. She had packed her bags, her eyes darting fearfully towards the window, towards the lake. "This isn't a place, Mara. It's a trap. It's hungry." "No," Mara said, her voice quiet but firm. She wasn't looking at Anna. She was looking at the lake, but her gaze was turned inward. The dreams, the whispers, the words on the mirror, they weren't threats. They were calls. "It's not a trap. It's a memory, and I have to remember why." The last time she went to the shore alone, it was late afternoon. The sky was clear. The oppressive mist had finally burned away, and for the first time sunlight pierced the clouds, casting golden shafts onto the water. The lake was perfectly calm, but as she stood on the damp earth, a strange and impossible thing began to happen. The water was receding. Not slowly, like a tide, but purposefully, as if being drawn back by an immense, invisible siphon. The shoreline expanded second by second, exposing dark, glistening mud, and from that mud, structures began to rise. The slate roofs of houses, the arch of a stone bridge, the walls of an old schoolhouse, with its empty benches still in rows. And finally, the church, emerging in its full Gothic glory, water cascading from its belfry in a silent waterfall. The entire village of W. Aldenstein surfaced from its watery grave to greet her. Mara took a step forward, her feet sinking into the soft primeval ooze of the lakebed. She walked onto what was once the main road, towards the central square, and as her feet touched the ancient cobblestones, she heard the voice again, clear as day, a collective whisper that came from the very stones around her. "You have returned." And in that instant, she remembered. Not a past life, not a ghost's tale. A memory from her own blood, a genetic echo passed down through generations, a great-grandmother she'd never known, a small village nestled in a valley that was always too damp, the black umbrellas of a funeral procession for a little boy, the mayor's son, who had fallen into the town well, the collective grief and guilt that soured the very earth, and the bell, the frantic, desperate ringing of the church bell, not as a warning, but as a summons, a final prayer as the ground gave way in the water. The memory of the earth rose not to destroy them, but to claim them, to hold them in its timeless, silent embrace. They never found Mara's body. The lake returned to its normal level by morning, as if nothing had happened. But on the shore where she had last stood lay her journal. The final entry was written in a hurried yet strangely peaceful hand. "We were here, and so we will remain. The lake is memory, and memory does not drown." What if W. Aldenstein is not the only place of its kind? What if water is not a boundary, but a doorway? What if silence is not an absence, but a voice we have simply forgotten how to hear? What do you think really happened to Mara? What is the true nature of the secret hidden by the lake? Write your thoughts and your own theories in the comments below. We read every single one.